everyone, and welcome to week 2 and the beginning of our first unit, College Literacy. This week we are reading two different texts. The first one is about new literacies and the extended definition of literacy beyond the simple meaning of reading and writing. We particularly bring this extended understanding to college as you are starting your first semester to help you be more successful in college as you're navigating this new life and new territory for you. We also read about good writing and what principles should govern writing and make it successful and effective. Last week in your discussions, you talked a lot about so many concepts of writing and what you expect college writing to be about. You mentioned correctness, you mentioned types of writing that you prefer. Some of you talked about expectations from professors. Some of you talked about their love-hate relationship with writing. And this week in Shelley Reid's 10 Ways to Think About Writing, the first 5 ways are essential for any writing you do in and outside of college. Any writing that you do, not just for this class, not just in your first year, not just in your time in college, but any type of writing, it's very important that you follow these certain ways that Shelley Reid discusses and that we're going to read about this week. These 5 ways are also very important for our first assignment on narrative writing, which I'll talk more about in the coming few minutes. So let's get started. So let's start by asking this question: what is narrative? Some of you mentioned in your discussions last week that you like narrative writing, but you didn't really discuss much about what we mean by narrative. So what is a narrative? Let's know together. The easiest and the simplest definition of narrative is it's a story. But a story that has a purpose. It's not just I'm telling a story just to fill time or to pass time or because I don't have anything else to say. It has a purpose. It has a particular audience. You're targeting somebody. You're targeting little children. You're targeting your family members. You're targeting your friends. You have particular audience that you'd like to talk to and tell them that story. And one of the most important things in a narrative is details. And we'll talk more about that, especially in the light or in the context of reading Shelley Reid's 10 Ways About Writing. Some of the principles she discusses about showing and describing and giving details so your audience understands what exactly you're talking about. So a narrative is a story that has a purpose, audience, and details. And as you can see in these pictures in front of you, these are all examples of stories, either written stories, like in a book, stories parents read to children before bedtime, stories you read on your own, or stories that can be just told verbally without actually being written or read. Okay? So this is simply what narrative means. Another important feature or a bunch of features of a narrative is it has a sequence of events. So any story has events, and you have to think of, okay, which events I'll be telling in my narrative. This is very important because sometimes we get lost and sometimes we start getting like a few events or a group of events and put them together. No, they have to be in a sequence, they have to make sense. And more importantly, they have to have vivid details. You cannot just say, like as Shelley Reid talks in the part about the green ball, you cannot say I have small green ball. What kind of ball? Is it big ball, small ball? What shade of green? Is it like a soccer ball? Is it like a beach ball? Is it like a medicine ball for exercising? What kind of ball we're talking about? The same here. Use what we call sensory details. So you help your reader see and hear and feel and smell all the details in that event. So don't say it was warm. So is it warm like it was 70 degrees, because for some people this is warm, or was it warm like in 60 degrees, or was it warm like in 100 degrees? And what does warm mean to you? How it makes you feel comfortable or uncomfortable? For example, if it's 80 or above, I personally feel uncomfortable. So, what kind of details are you going to include to help your reader engage and stay engaged in your story, in your narrative? The third important point is the significance. So, what's the significance of this narrative? And the significance or the importance, we'll talk about that in a minute more, but think of something that's meaningful to you, that has um, left a mark in your life in a way or another. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. So we'll start with talking about the events, because without events, we don't actually have a story or a narrative. So we have three different types of events. And this might be confusing to some of you. It's like, what? Any event just has event. Like, just events and sequence of events. What are we talking about here? So if you think about it, any point in your life, any event, let's think of a family dinner, for example, okay? Let's have this situation as our example here. The actual event that happened was all your family gathering together, your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, nephews, nieces, grandparents, and you're all sitting together in one place and having a good time. So this is the context and the people. So maybe it was Thanksgiving dinner, maybe it was a reunion, maybe it was an engagement or a wedding party. So this is the context. What was the occasion? Who are the people who were in that situation, in that event, and all the details. What was the food like? What food did you eat? Where were you sitting? Was it indoors, outdoors? Was it hot or cold? Um, how many people were there? What music did you listen to? Okay, so you have a lot of details to describe here. Was the food good? Were people happy? Were they laughing? There was music or no music? People were watching TV, kids were playing. These are all the details. So this is the actual event that happened. And then we have the experienced event. The experienced event means your feelings and thoughts during that event. How were you feeling? Were you happy? Were you engaged? Were you playing, listening to music, singing, dancing, having fun, telling jokes, playing with little kids in your family? What were your thoughts? Were you looking at people and thinking, oh, my uncle looks sad, or my cousin doesn't look well, or my niece looks a little bit uncomfortable? What were your feelings and thoughts during that event? And the last type of event is the remembered event. Now that you are recalling in your mind that event, sometimes your feelings now might change. Maybe something has changed between you and some people in your family who were in that event. So maybe now you think more bitterly about that. Maybe you feel more passionate about that event now that, especially now that under COVID, we are not enjoying this kind of events anymore. We cannot get together and have this kind of gathering anymore. So the remembered event comes with different feelings that, or a set of feelings that may be different from those experienced at the event time itself. Also, the remembered event comes with reflections. You start thinking about what was happening. Why did you act the way you did? Why you weren't as engaged with your family members as you should have been? Um, oh my God, I said that horrible thing to my cousin, and she was really upset with me. Oh my God, I shouldn't have said that. So now you're reflecting and you're trying to think about your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts, and trying to think, it's like, I shouldn't have done that, or I should have done things differently. Okay, so this is what we call the remembered event. And of course, sometimes you miss some of the details of the actual events. Maybe you don't remember what color your cousin's dress was, or whether your aunt was wearing earrings or not. Some of the details may be missing, and that's fine. Some of the details may be added because our memory is not perfect. So this is what we call the remembered event. So we have the actual event that actually happened with all its details as if it was captured on a video cam. We have the experienced event, how you experience it, what your thoughts and feelings were about that event or during that event, and the remembered event now that you're looking back at it, and all the feelings and reflections and the detail that come to mind when you think of that event. Why, why it is important for us to talk about these three different events? Because now that you're remembering that, you're actually using your memory. You're doing your narrative in retrospect, that as if you're doing a flashback, as you see in movies. Flashback that takes you to that specific moment, that specific event, and then you try to recall all the details, the people, the feelings, and maybe you start having some thoughts and different feelings, some reflections, and so on. So that's why it's very important to be aware of the actual event, the experienced event, and the remembered event. And sometimes they are not necessarily identical to each other, again, because our memory is not, we don't have photographic memory. Unless you are watching a video of that event and you can actually remember all the details, but you may not remember all your feelings, or you may not have the same feelings about that event right now as you had 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. Okay, so we move between time. We move between the past when the event actually happened to the present when we reflect and think again about that event, and the future, as I'm going to talk in a minute, what we learn from that event, what we learn from our reflections on that event. So a narrative should have all three dimensions. You should have the past, you should have the present as you're thinking about it right now, and the future, what this event tells you, what this family gathering, what this school party, what this game has taught you that's very important for you in the future. When we say the word reflection, some of you start thinking about all abstract things, that I'll reflect on this, and I reflect on my life, and I reflect on my week, but we don't actually know what reflection means. Or we have this abstract idea, but we cannot really touch it. We cannot really have it in our hands. So think of reflection as the difference between the visible and the invisible. What does this mean is reflection is thinking about the events and your thoughts about these events in order to make sense of them or to see them differently. So it means thinking about what others may not have seen in the event itself. Your thoughts, your feelings, or as I said before, the lessons that you have learned from that event. I was rude to my uncle. I wasn't sensitive enough to my cousin's feelings. I wasn't really paying much attention to what my grandma was saying. And now that my grandma has passed, I'm really regretful of this. So, what does this tell us in the future? What lesson I'm learning from this? This is what we mean by reflection. Thinking about the thing that not everyone may have seen, not everyone in that family gathering may have understood or may have seen the invisible thoughts and feelings you had during that event. This is what you reflect on, and this is what makes narrative more significant, that we think about it not just for the sake of writing about it, but for the sake of learning from it and moving forward. And later in the semester, we'll start talking about reflection in the context of writing, what we learn from our writing from one assignment to the next. So that's why we start by addressing reflection in the first unit, because it's one important component and element in our course. Another important part of reflection is shifting views. As I said earlier, sometimes when you start reflecting and thinking in the remembered event, you start having a different perspective. Oh my God, when my uncle said that, I snapped back at him and I hated what he said. But looking back now, 3 years later, and with more understanding of what my uncle was going through, I now have a different perspective of what my uncle said at that event. You have different emotions. Maybe you were sad then, but now you are sad that you didn't give yourself the time to enjoy the event and to enjoy your family gathering. Maybe you were just like obnoxious back then and you didn't pay attention to your little cousins. But now it's like, oh, you know what? Now that we cannot actually get together, I miss them and I miss our time together. And you start having different thoughts. What you thought back then that it was ridiculous or meaningless, maybe it's more meaningful to you now and it's more valuable and precious to you now. So shifting views is again part of our reflection, part of the difference between the actual event, the experienced event, and the remembered event. Because now we start seeing things differently. We reflect and we learn and we have different understanding and different perspective on what happened back then. And now is the time when I answer that question that's lingering in your head right now. What on earth does this have to do with our assignment? Or what does this mean for our first assignment, a literacy narrative? Simply, you will choose a literacy moment in your life. Literacy broadly defined after what we've learned in the reading, what are new literacies, and in our first discussion for the week. Something that you consider yourself literate at. I'm literate at music. I'm literate at playing softball. I'm literate at time management. Something that you're good at, something you've learned in prior to coming to college, and now it's going to be very important to you in college. So you'll start thinking about when you think you've become literate in that, or an event where you mastered or you learned to master or you showed your expertise or mastery of that literacy. And once you have decided on that, you'll start thinking about all the three principles that Shelley Reed discusses in the first way of thinking about writing: the audience, the purpose, the context, show, don't tell. Okay? And then you'll start thinking of your purpose. What's the purpose of writing this narrative? Please don't tell me to complete an assignment and get a good grade. Perfect. This is not the purpose. Any piece of writing that you write, even a text message, a post on Facebook, a post on Instagram, these all have specific purposes. So think more. What's your purpose? What message are you trying to send through this narrative? And then consider your audience, your reader. Again, don't think of me. I'm not your reader. Yes, I'm your reader because I need to give you feedback and grade your writing. But who's the authentic audience who will be interested in reading your narrative? For example, you can think of your family. You can think of your high school friends. You can think of your sports team, your high school sports team members. You can think of a professor of another course that you'd like to show, hey, I know how to do that. Read my narrative to know how I learned to do this. Okay? So think of your audience. Who's your audience? And then tell your story. Sequence of events and details, exactly as we discussed now, and as Shelley Reed insists that details are important for your audience. If I'm gonna read your narrative, I wanna hear people talk. Include dialogue, short dialogue that happened there. Include feelings. Include smells. Whatever sensory information and details you can give, this will engage the reader. This will help the reader read through your narrative and enjoy it, not just read it. It's like, I have to read this. But no, feel engaged and interactive with your narrative. Use descriptive language. Show, don't tell. Don't tell me the kids were playing with the ball. What kind of game they were playing? The food was delicious. What food? Fried food? Fried chicken? Mac and cheese? I'm getting hungry now. And very important thing, be very specific in your language use. As Shelley Reed discusses, I don't want to see something like, some people were sitting together. Whose people? Which people? Tell me. My uncle and aunt, my uncle and grandma, my teammates. Be very specific. I don't want to see the word people. I don't want to see the word things. It's like, we did a lot of things. Like what? Or that has a lot of issues. Like what? Be very specific. Be descriptive. Help me engage in your reading, in your writing. Help the reader understand exactly what you're talking about. Something very important, and I know that in high school sometimes they tell you not to do it. Don't be afraid of using personal pronouns. For the Lord's sake, this is a literacy narrative. It's a narrative, it's a personal thing. So definitely I'm expecting to see a lot of I, a lot of we, a lot of us, a lot of me. Okay? So this is very important. Don't be afraid of using personal pronouns. Another thing is, be creative with genre and media. What does this mean? If you have a picture or a photo of that event that you'll be talking about, use it in your essay, and I'm going to show you next week how to do that. If you have a song that maybe was playing at that event, and every time now you listen to that song you remember that event, or a song that expresses your feelings and emotions and thoughts about that event, embed it with and again I'm going to show you next week how to do that. Think of using these media elements as integral pieces in your narrative. They are not just cosmetic. I'm not going to add a picture to make it look good. No, I want to show my emotions. I want to show how happy people were. I want to show the colors represented in that event. I want to show how happy we were after we won our game. So that's why I'm showing that picture, or I'm using that picture in my narrative. So don't think of that as something you just, hey, this is just to make it look nice. No, looking nice is not our goal. We have to think of our purpose and our audience and consider it part of the details that you'll be including here. Okay, so these are some of the things that I'd like you to start thinking about. And in our second discussion post for this week, you'll start brainstorming for your literacy narrative. You'll start thinking of the event, of the literacy, of the audience, purpose, and all the details that you'll be discussing in your narrative before you start actually drafting your narrative next week, and we'll talk about that more next week. Okay? Now, next we're gonna show a nice video. You're gonna watch a nice video that wraps up and summarizes the whole thing that we talked about today about narrative and what elements should be included in your narrative. Okay, so watch the video, and then after that go to Slack and start the brainstorming of your literacy narrative. I hope this presentation today has given you some good thoughts about what literacy narrative is all about, and what I'm expecting to see in your literacy narrative. There will be another short video about the assignment, and then we'll open it for questions about the assignment and details of your assignment. Thank you, and I'll see you all on Slack.